everybody, my name is Kara Brown. I am an urban fantasy author, and as you can see, I have no bookshelves. But that's not what we're going to actually talk about. What we are going to talk about are going to be magic systems. Now, if you follow me on Twitter, you'll know that I took a Twitter poll where I just asked everybody if you want me to talk about animal companions or if I wanted to talk about magic systems to share for your educational benefit, and everybody picked magic systems, so that's what we're going to talk about. If you would like to get in on this Twitter action, you can go ahead and find a link down below in the video. Follow me there. I post these polls typically anywhere between Friday and Sunday for you to go ahead and have a say on what you want to learn, and I only give 2 options because I learned the hard way that when you give 3, they become a tie. Now, a magic system is basically the way that magic is going to work in your world, and of course, if you are in a setting that has magic, this might be something that you really want to take the time to figure out. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go over kind of a lot of the fundamentals that make a magic system. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. I'm going to give you some examples about what I'm talking about, and then you guys are going to be set loose and you can make your own magic system, and I hope that this video will help you figure it all out. Now, when we're talking about magic systems, we are talking about kind of like a range of how potent magic is in your world. In my brain, I like to say low magic, moderate magic, and high magic, right? So in what I have, for example, of a low magic example would be Indian in the cupboard. So the only magic that really happened involved the cupboard, and that was pretty much about it, and like nothing else happened with that. Now, a moderate example is, I would actually say Conan the Barbarian. Now, some people would say that that is a low magic system, but you have got wizards casting spells, you've got aliens from space, you've got gods on the rampage. Like, I would almost say that it should actually belong in a high fantasy, but it doesn't meet all the requirements for that. So Conan the Barbarian is a moderate magic system to me, personal opinion. Another one that I would actually say is a moderate system, although it could be said as low or high depending on who you're talking to, is going to be Harry Potter. And the reason I say that is because just of the way that magic works, and it still doesn't fix a lot of contemporary things that are going on. High magic systems are going to be your Lord of the Rings and your Forgotten Realms, where it's very potent, it's very commonly used, it's pretty much everywhere. In fact, they've got magic for just about anything. Another really good example, if we're going to be looking at literature for high magic, is actually going to be Tamora Pierce's books set in the Trayvon universe, because they've got magic for just about everything in there, and it's really ingenious how she makes it work, but more on that later. Now, in literature, you're going to hear the terms soft and hard magic, which can be taken a lot of different ways, but in the context of using a magic system, a soft magic system is basically a reference to how the magic is used. It's not explained, it's usually done to evoke a sense of wonder, where a hard magic system is actually going to have a lot of rigorous rules. Your reader's going to know exactly how it works, and then it also kind of has like a little bit of a scientific explanation of it. For soft magic systems, I would say that Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and even Sleeping Beauty are really good examples of a soft magic system, because there's magic in there, but you don't really know how it works. It's a thing. And for hard magic systems, we're going to look at Mistborn, there's Full Metal Alchemist, and there's also going to be the Dresden Files written by Jim Butcher. And the reason that those are hard systems is because it's very it's pointed out, it's always explained about how magic works, and a lot of the fundamentals are given for the reader's benefit. And it's also kind of like given to you because then you it raises the stakes when some of that criteria is not made. And that's going to be like the big difference between one explains exactly how magic works, and one is just kind of like, ooh, ah. Now, when I make a magic system, and I've made a couple different ones for various projects that I'm working on right now, I ask myself a couple of key questions. One, how can I use magic to screw over my hero? I really do like magic, and a lot of times I see magic being used in a way to help the hero or the problem that's happening in the story, but I personally like to use it in a way that at first is beneficial, and then it turns on the hero. That's a lot more interesting, it's a lot more creative. Now, following this thought, you need to ask yourself, what is it about magic that's going to make it cost more than the benefit it provides? If you guys have seen any of my videos, I usually talk about consequences and that there needs to be flaws, and a magic system kind of needs to follow that too. You do need to treat it a little bit like it's a character. You know, you need to talk about how it's useful, you need to talk about where it's from, you need to talk about how it's going to fuck things up. And the other thing that you need to ask, or at least I usually ask myself when I am working with a magic system in any of my novels, is, am I going to use this to fix my problem at the end, or am I going to just kind of have it as background noise? And the reason I would encourage you to ask that question is because when you are working with your magic system, it's really important to go ahead and figure out how dominant this element of your story is going to be, so that way you can make sure that you are planning for it. Unless you're a pantser, then I'm sure you'll figure it out. Now, it would be a huge disservice if I talked about a magic system and I did not mention the 3 laws of Brandon Sanderson. Brandon Sanderson is very interesting when it comes to how he does his world building, how he plans things out. And one of the very first few panels that he was in, he actually got into a huge debate with a bunch of other authors because they asked about the magic system, and he's like, well, I make sure that I have it all explained and I have it concrete and da 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 da, and everybody on that panel started to argue with him. I saw a recording of it, completely awesome, but that's not the point. The point I'm trying to make is that Brandon Sanderson is very thorough when it comes to his world building, and he's also really particular about how things work in his world, and he's got 3 rules for this. Now, I'm not going to pretend like I know this off the top of my head because I don't. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read it off the screen right here. So, Brandon Sanderson's 3 laws of magic follow as so. The first, an author's ability to resolve conflict with magic in a satisfying way is directly proportional to how well the reader understands magic. So, what that means is, however he makes the magic in his world, he's going to make the way he resolves conflict with it in the same, at the same level that he wants the reader to understand it. So it's not going to be like Gandalf, where Gandalf suddenly is just casting all sorts of spells that we didn't know that he could cast. So he's going to make sure that the reader has a very firm idea about how that works. So number 2 is weakness cost is more interesting than the powers themselves. I totally agree with that. I think that anytime that there's a magic system, the cost of using it should be a lot greater. Warhammer was a really good game for that because we were in one campaign and somebody's like, well, I'm just going to cast this very convenient spell, and instead he opened up a bunch of chaos voids and we had demons coming at us. I really like that just because it's unpredictable, and it can make a story a lot more interesting. So when you are making your spells and you're figuring out how they cast and all that stuff, what is going to be the side effect of casting that? And I have a really good example that I'm going to get to after I mention the third one. Alright, so the third one is going to be expand on what you already have before you add something new. And I think that that's just being thorough. If you have a system, go ahead and kind of make sure that you have that completely fleshed out before you start tacking more things onto it. For those of you who don't know, this entire lecture about Brandon Sanderson's 3 laws is actually available on YouTube, so if you want to go find that lecture and watch it, you can. He does write on the board, but his handwriting's a little hard to read, so you may have to turn on captions and stuff if you need to actually see what he's talking about. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the big example that I would like to use about a really solid system that has a lot of good consequences. The system that I want to use is actually going to be an anime, and it's called Darker Than Black, and the first time I watched it, I was just completely enamored with the entire way that this system happened. I was more engaged with the magic system than the actual story, but the story is really good, so that just to give you kind of an idea. And the way that this worked is that you would have people that would have abilities, and in order for them to have their abilities, they would have to recharge them, but you couldn't recharge them the same way as somebody else. So for somebody to have super strength, he would have to eat a whole bunch of hard-boiled eggs, or for somebody to be super fast, he'd have to open a book and flip the corner of all the pages down. It was just a weird thing that every one of them had to do in order to have their power, and unfortunately, if they didn't do these things to recharge their abilities, then they just turned into goo. Right? So we have a really amazing power, we have the cost of doing it, and then we have the consequence of not meeting that cost. Freaking genius as far as I'm concerned. So at this point, I'm going to throw questions that you should probably ask yourself. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to have a thing down on the bottom. Again, free resources. I love to give you guys stuff about just questions that you should ask yourself. You can print it out, put it in a Word doc, whatever you want to do. But I'm going to verbally say it and try to explain it so that way when you're looking at it, you have a bit more context about what I'm talking about. So the first question is, who can cast magic? Is it everybody? Is it a particular type of person? What exactly is the requirement that they need to meet for that? So one example is if only elves can cast magic, what about half elves? Can there be half elves? Maybe if they can, how much of a percentage of an elf do you actually need to be in order to cast magic? Is it something that can be taught? So for example, in Buffy we had Willow, and Willow at first could not cast magic, and then by the end of it she did a whole bunch of studying and she figured it out, and then she was casting magic like nobody's business by the end of the entire season. So the next question is, what can it do and what can it not do? Make sure that you have these things figured out. As much as I love Lord of the Rings, just having Gandalf come out and just suddenly just cast whatever spell he wanted to resolve whatever thing he had going on was a little OP as far as I was concerned. I know some of you are going to argue with me, but it was just he was just always being able to come in and do just about anything, and the only time he wasn't able to do something was just when he wasn't there. So is your magic going to be able to heal things? Is it going to be able to explode things? Is it going to be able to protect people? What is your magic in this particular system going to be able to do? So the next thing is, how exactly is this magic going to be channeled? Do you need an object? Do you need a state of mind? Do you need both? Do you need to use magical, words that are spoken in a particular way, or does it work? Right? So you need to figure out how they're going to channel it. Harry Potter, basically what would happen is they would need a wand, that was a prerequisite, and then they would need to say the word, right? So that was 2 things that they needed to do in order to cast spells. Following this is actually, where does your magic come from? And the example that I gave you when I said darker than black, their magic came from 2 different gates. You had Heaven's Gate and you had Hell's Gate, and that was pretty much where all the stuff was coming from. In your book, that's obviously going to be different. Does the magic come from the earth? Does it come from a divine being? Come from an object? Can it only be done at a certain location? So where is your magic coming from, and what are the limitations about where it comes from as well? Obviously, I'm talking a lot about limitations and consequences because that's just interesting. And since we are talking a little bit more about the limitations, I would really encourage you, for whatever magic system that you decide to craft, to make sure that there are very meaningful consequences and meaningful limitations into what it can do. Just because if it was able to do everything, then again, I'm kind of thinking it's a little OP, a little Mary Sue, but that's my perspective. If you can find a way to make that work, let me know. I'm very curious to see how you would do that, but Carol Brown likes to see limitations and consequences for magic that are usually worse than actually using the magic, so that's just how I am. Now, the last very thing that I want to talk about is a little bit more on the cost of using the magic. So there's a couple different stories that I read where I see a cost of magic. In Tamora Pierce's books that has to do with the Trebon universe, and that novel series, because she's got a bunch of books involved with that, anybody who can cast magic is able to do it, but if they do too much of it, they get really tired, sometimes they pass out, and when they pass out, they'll stay asleep for like 3 or 4 days while their body just naturally kind of recovers their inner mana, so that way they can cast magic again. Actually, for this particular video, for my engagement, I would like to hear about a magic system that you have read about or maybe seen in a movie that had a really kind of pro and con system, and just link that down below, just so that way anybody else who comes in here is going to see more examples other than the ones that I gave. And, feel free to talk about those just a little bit so that way people kind of know what they're getting into. Obviously no spoilers, but, let them know. So I would be amiss if I didn't give you guys an example of a bad magic system. And I'm going to harp on this a little bit. And if you don't agree, feel free to leave your rebuttal down below. I will read it. I will respond to it. But this is, again, my personal opinion. A bad magic system, in my opinion, right now is easily observable in Marvel's Valkyrie. I only read a couple of the comics and then I put them down because it's bad. It's really bad. The storyline's bad. The way that the system is being used is bad. It's just, I don't even know what's happening anymore. But in the comic series, Valkyrie is basically this being who's got this artifact, and this artifact can just do whatever. Right? It can just become whatever. It's a deus machina at the point when I was reading it. And I know they tried to cover that up by saying that the object continues to learn and grow with me. And that's just lazy writing. There's no consequence and there's no limitation to this item, and it can pretty much do whatever it needs to do in order to resolve whatever the comic book's issue is, then I'm done. It's bad. And I don't know where they're going to go with this comic because I'm not going to read it anymore. They had a couple episodes to win me over, and that was pretty much it. Now, to give Marvel a little bit of credit in their early female Thor comics that they had coming out, I was pretty engaged with that because in that one, female Thor was actually suffering from cancer because she wasn't actually an Asgardian. So every time she used the hammer, it was just very slowly killing her. And I thought that was genius. I was all over that. I was like, okay, cool. Let's see how this is going to pan out. And then the rest of it came out, and yeah. And I really don't want to dive too much more into that other than it just makes me really sad and disappointed. And yeah, I don't give them my money anymore. Don't do that in your work. In fact, do better in your work. Because I know that if you're looking at this channel, you're trying to learn, you're trying to do it right. And hopefully I've been able to give you some things to consider and think about when you are making your magic system. Now, again, as I said, down below, I'm going to have a little link down there, a little freebie thing for you guys to use when making your magic system. I hope that you find it useful, and I hope that you can use it to help, plot your ideas and figure out what direction that you want to go in. One thing I do want to talk about, adding on to this, the very last thing, is that you can have more than one magic system in your world. You can have, maybe a religious-based one, and then you can have an elemental-based one, and you can have, all sorts of ones, alright? Don't feel like you only get to have one. It's your book, it's your universe, you just play with it. If you would like to know about a tool that might be able to help you with that outside of the one that I'm providing you down below, I've recently fallen in love with Campfire, a product review to come on that very soon, where in part of the world building package that they have, you basically answer a lot of those questions involved with the magic system. So if you want a place where you can kind of put it all in one place, I would highly recommend that. But that brings us to the end of the video. Again, if you know of a magic system in a book that you really love, feel free to share that works down below, maybe list of kind of the pros and cons of the magic system, and I also need more reading material, so definitely do that. If you didn't like my opinion in regards to the comics that I was just talking about, you can leave those down below too. I'm more than happy happy to read and discuss those with you. No hard feelings here. We all have opinions and some of them stink. But that is going to be me for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you are new to my channel, feel free to subscribe here on Carol Brown's channel. I talk and whine about the life of a writer, sometimes under the influence of wine. I have a newsletter that you can sign up for, and the only reason I am mentioning it is because if you are not quite sure if I know what I'm talking about when it comes to any of this writing nonsense, signing up for that will give you a free copy of a short story. You can read it, peruse it, judge for yourself if I know what I'm talking about. And if you're like, no, not into this, not my jam, you can unsubscribe from the newsletter. No hurt feelings. I totally get it. If you do happen to like it, I also have a book out called Queen of Swords and Silence. You can check that out too. It's available on Amazon at the moment. And if you really like it, maybe you can leave a review too. Maybe not. I'm not going to tell you what to do. It would just make me really happy. But that is all I've got for you today. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to hang out, and I'm going to talk to y'all again real soon.